Okay, welcome everybody. We are continuing on our exciting journey through Faust. We are in part 2, Act 2. This is a very interesting section, and I hope we're going to have a very interesting discussion about it because it really gets into all kinds of symbolism and some of the really key themes and concepts that we've been exploring. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion. The format today is going to be the same as we've done before. I'm going to go over some of the highlights of the content of Act 2. And then I just want to highlight a couple of, again, big themes. I have some pictures I wanted to share with you. So hopefully this will make it a little bit lively as we go through this. And then we'll open up the floor to questions, comments, just whatever you guys want to share. It's a little bit smaller group tonight, so hopefully everybody will have plenty of time to share. So Act 2 is a hodgepodge. There's no way around it. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving parts here, but I'm going to try to, again, just go through and mention some of the main characters and some of the highlights. So if you remember last time, we finished with the scene at the court of the emperor, where we met the Helen and Paris, who were summoned. It wasn't really them, it was kind of their apparition. And then if you remember, Faust tried to catch, grasp Helen, and he falls unconscious. He fails in his attempt, and Mephistopheles kind of drags him off the stage. So Act 2 opens up with the continuation of that. And where do we find ourselves? Well, we find ourselves at a very interesting juncture. We're back at the study, back at the place where we started. Essentially, we've gone full circle. We started at the study, and now we're ending at the study. Another interesting thing to note is Faust is again unconscious, just like in the beginning of Act 1 of Part 2. He is again out. He has to somehow regain his spirit, and it'll be very interesting to see how that happens. So what happens at the study? Well, Mephistopheles takes a look around and says, well, not much has changed here. It's all the same musty books, manuscripts. Everything seems to be kind of stuck in the same routine. And so what he does is he picks up a bell and rings this bell. And in the commentaries that I've read, a lot of significance has been attached to him ringing this bell, kind of waking up the sleepy status quo and disrupting it. And there's even thoughts of people are comparing this to the scientific revolution that ended the era of scholasticism and this blind adherence to just repeating the same Aristotelian dogmas and the same precepts that have been passed on through the Greek learning. Instead, emphasis is on new learning, new ways of looking at nature, new ways of understanding. So it's a very interesting moment and a very interesting sort of action that jolts the readers, and obviously when you have when it's performed, it jolts the viewers, the audience, to kind of out of their melancholy or their just regular participation in what they're looking at. So and then we have again a replay essentially of what we've already encountered in Part 1. So Mephistopheles disguises himself as a professor. He puts on the scholar's cloak, and we see him interacting again with the previous character, the character we've met previously, except that they've progressed, or have they? It's not clear. So the student is now the baccalaureate. He's a bachelor, newly made bachelor. Wagner is now the doctor. He's replacing Faust in his original post. And we have a new character, Famulus, whom Mephistopheles nicknames Nicodemus first. And that's another interesting theme. Why does he nickname him Nicodemus? Nicodemus was a rabbi that came to Jesus by night, very unsure of himself, asking him all kinds of questions. So anyway, maybe it was a sarcastic remark when he named him Nicodemus. And then we have this back and forth of Mephistopheles with these various representatives of the academia. So the student represents this kind of, again, this sort of repetition and adherence to tradition, appeals to authority in a lot of ways. And then we have the old student who is now the bachelor, who is now the new graduate, and he is the opposite. He doesn't want to have anything to do with the old ways. He wants to demolish all the old ways. Mephistopheles is actually a little bit taken aback by his energy, and it says, that's this guy is. I need to be careful with this one. I need to watch him. But then he proceeds to seek out Dr. Wagner, and Wagner is busy doing something very interesting. He is creating the homunculus. Now, I was talking to Dimitri just before this started and reminiscing about a book I had in my childhood. It was called Homunculus. It was about the passage of science through the stage of kind of medieval learning to modernity. And in the beginning there were some excerpts about instructions left by Paracelsus on how to make a homunculus, sort of like a home lab kit, like a do-it-yourself kit, how to make a homunculus at home. But the instructions were just amazing. And so to give you a sense of what these instructions are like, I want to read an excerpt I found on Wikipedia. This is there were several different ways you could do it. One was Wagner's way, which is to heat up something in a retort. But there were other ways, and particularly through digging up the root of mandrake or mandragora. So the second way is it's really good because it gives you exactly the taste of the kinds of instructions you have to follow to do this at home. So here it goes. Would you like to make a mandragora as powerful as the homunculus, little man in a bottle, so praised by Paracelsus? Well, then find the root of the plant called bryony. Take it out of the ground on a Monday, the day of the moon, a little time after the vernal equinox. Cut off the ends of the root and bury it at night in some country churchyard in a dead man's grave. For 30 days, water it with cow's milk in which 3 bats have been drowned. When the 31st day arrives, take out the root in the middle of the night and dry it in an oven, heated with branches of verbena, I'm not sure what that is, then wrap it up in a piece of dead man's winding sheet and carry it with you everywhere. So you can kind of tell by these instructions that they're not exactly easy to follow. Paracelsus, it was similar types of stuff where you have to use, I think it was a dead horse's womb. I mean, just the kinds of things that, not easily come by, maybe easier than now. But in any case, these were some pretty fantastical instructions. I also have a couple of images I want to show you. Here's one. Let me share my screen real quick. Let's see. Can you guys see my screen? So this is actually a picture of Dr. Wagner creating homunculus, and you can see homunculus in the little retort already appearing. So this was done after Goethe's work was published, obviously. So Goethe did not use this as his source. This was based on Goethe's description. So, but I thought this was really good as far as kind of the look in Wagner's eyes and just the facial expression and everything else. Then there's this one, which is just more generic. This is called The Search for Philosopher's Stone, which Philosopher's Stone was kind of a similar concept in a sense that it was meant as something that would give you both rejuvenation and ability to turn metals into gold. And essentially it would kind of overcome the limitations of matter. So these two paintings hopefully give you some idea, maybe jog your imagination a little bit. Then there's a book that I want to show you as well. Stop sharing this 1 second. Yes, this right here. Okay. So this is a work by someone named Barkhusen, who was a chemist in Germany right around the time of Goethe. So most likely Goethe either knew of him or knew of his manuscripts. They were quite well known because of the great illustrations, and hopefully you can see these illustrations. So this is all about the process of creating a homunculus in a retort. And notice this in the lower left-hand corner, you have these 4 substances, and it's called materia prima. And I think we talked about this, mentioned this before with in our group, that materia prima is the kind of the chaotic substance that you start out with, and then these are the planets around it, and you have the influence of the planets, and that's what you're trying to overcome. Essentially, is you're trying to create something out of this chaos in a way that overcomes the influence of the planets. And then if we go further with these, you have just all kinds of different stages where you interact with the sun and the moon, and I think these are they symbolize the female and the male and their interaction. And there's some fire where you purify things, and you just keep going with this symbolism here. Eventually, if you are doing well, you end up with homunculus. There he is, holding the sun and the moon in his hand. He is born, and the spirit. The dove represents the spirit. So there's the spiritual kind of descending on him, kind of like the spirit descending on Jesus. And you have this primeval water. I mean, there's all kinds of symbolism involved here. But this, again, this is all that Wagner is involved in. I'm going to stop sharing now. And Mephistopheles walks in, and bingo, homunculus is born. So a lot of scholars think that it was actually Mephistopheles who created homunculus. He just used Wagner as this sort of cloak for actually creating him, just like he used Faust to get at Helen. So this is another interesting divergence where we can maybe explore this if you're interested in that. But it does seem that at least he had some hand in the success of this operation. The bigger question is, what is homunculus? What does homunculus actually represent in the scheme of things? What does he have to do with Faust? What kind of being is he? And I guess I can cover some of these, but I'm just going to leave them as kind of open-ended questions for our discussion to see what you guys think, and then maybe express my own opinion about it. So homunculus is born, and he has some ideas about how to revive Faust. And his idea is we need to get Faust to the classical Greek landscape. We need to travel. It's not clear whether they're traveling just through space or through space and through time. or whether it's this, again, some other realm that is sort of frozen in time, where you have all these classical characters there that are still around. It's very interesting to think about the fact that there seems to be, at least from Mephistopheles' standpoint, two nether regions, one for the pagans and the other one for Christians. So he makes a reference to the pagan hell and the Christian hell as two separate places. And again, it's not clear how these spheres really interact with each other. Are these creatures hellish? Are they devilish? Are they somehow sanctified into Christian some sort of Christian mythology? Are they part of kind of God's order of things, or are they just sort of out there in limbo in this separate nether region? So anyway, all these are super interesting questions to explore. In the meantime, Faust, Homunculus, and Mephistopheles are whisked away, and Wagner is left in the lab to sort of finish up his notes, which is again somewhat comical. You know, Wagner really wants to get out into the world, but he's stuck in his lab. He needs to write his dissertation or whatever to publish his results. So he doesn't get to have all the fun. But Homunculus, Faust, and Mephistopheles, they all travel to this region, and as soon as Faust touches the ground, the sacred ground of classical antiquity, he's revived. And that serves as another revival for him. If you remember, the first time he's revived by Ariel and the little spirits that essentially allay his guilty conscience. But this time it's a different thing. It's a more sensory experience. He actually touches something and he feels the energy. He feels some magic, if you will, of that surrounding. Well, after that, we are back to almost the same experience as last time, where we had this festival with all kinds of interesting, with the processions of different beings and different characters. This is the same kind of whirlwind tour that we're on. So we encounter all kinds of Greek, ancient Greek characters, and mythological characters of Greek and Roman history. I'll recount just a couple to give an idea, or if you haven't read it, but if you've read it, you obviously will recall all of these. So we have griffins and sphinxes. We have giant ants who are all involved in gold digging and gold preserving and basically doing some sort of geological operations, which is interesting again, because Goethe, of course, that was part of his professional career at the court of the Duke to do mineralogical exploration. So again, it's interesting that he keeps turning to that. Then we have an encounter with the sirens, and we have an encounter with Lamia, who are these ghoulish vampire-like creatures. We have encounters with Stymphalian birds and Lernaean hydra. Those of you who are familiar with Hercules and his exploits, that's where these come from, as well as Chiron, who's also involved in Hercules mythology, as well as mythology surrounding Helen. So speaking of Helen, Chiron leads Faust to this character Manto, and Manto suggests that Faust turned to the sea to seek out seafaring creatures, and maybe they will somehow lead him to Helen. So both Homunculus, Mephistopheles, and Faust all go to the Aegean Sea. And there they meet Nereus and his daughters. According to mythology, there were 50 of them, and the most beautiful of them was Galatea. And this is where things get really interesting. Oh, by the way, I missed one interlude there where Homunculus encounters Greek philosophers, Anaxagoras and Thales, and has a back and forth with them about geology and about different theories on how the world's landscape came to be, whether it was through catastrophism or gradually, right, through gradual processes. And this was actually an actual debate in history at that time with various geological schools of thought, and the gradualism won eventually, but catastrophism or volcanism was another theory that was trying to explain how we got to where we are today. So anyway, just a whirlwind tour of all these characters. I'm going to stop because I want to maybe give a chance to Doug to add any of his comments. And then I want to open it up to you guys to just to see what you made of it in terms of big themes and ideas. And then I'll come back to that and sort of express my own thoughts and opinions on that. So Doug, do you have any thoughts? Have I missed something, or do you want to?
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up, so I don't have much to say, but these first sections are really interesting. And I think I got to the Varsilian fields, and I'd also kind of like to read it in that stage production thing, which I haven't had a chance to do, the script that was done in Scotland. And that gives you kind of the overall sweep of the action, even though it probably leaves out a lot of scenes. But then you can get this odd comprehensive view of what's really the thrust of it. But I haven't been able to do that. I think it's astonishing how much he's drawing on. And I mean, and you've clarified some things, and some other notes I'm going through now are kind of, the Walpurgis knot and how it recurs, and that there is one Northern European Walpurgis knot, and then there's this one from the South that's more fun, which oddly Ibsen, when he went to Rome, he kind of says he melted from his Nordic ice, and was actually found drunk in the streets of Rome, like in the gutter. I mean, it really changed him, and his playwriting changed. That's when he wrote those extravagant plays, Peer Gynt and Brand. So that interesting Northern Southern European thing is the only comment I really have right now, but I'll try to catch up a little bit more.
No, thank you for that, Doug. I've started skimming over The Italian Journey, which is the book I recommend you guys all read if you have time. It's basically a travelogue of Goethe as he traveled from Germany to Italy and all over Italy and Sicily. It's a wonderful read, just a really delightful read of him recording his experiences. And it illuminates a lot of things in Faust as well. So, like, for instance, one of the places he visited there was Mount Etna, Vesuvius. And of course, that is where that huge volcano eruption took place that buried Pompeii. And obviously that piqued his interest in this volcanic theory of geological evolution. And again, right here in this section, we have this discussion between Anaxagoras and Thales discussing exactly this. How does change happen? Does it happen organically, gradually by slow change, or does it happen through these crises, the volcanic crisis? And I guess relating it to the themes of this book, how does one get transformed? Is it through this gradual accretion of knowledge, experience, etc., or is it through some sort of crisis therapy, if you will, kind of almost Gestalt therapy, right? So it's super interesting to see these connections coming through from Goethe's own experience and being expressed in this book. So again, similar to some of his other classical references, I mean, he saw a bunch of classical works while he was in Florence and in Venice and in Sicily. And so obviously that left a huge impression on him, because now in this classical Walpurgis Night, all of these creatures are just roaming around and breaking through the seams of everything. You have the sirens and, the centaurs and nereids and tritons. I mean, it's just like a zoo, a classical zoo being let loose. Anyway, I'm rambling. If you want to say something, go ahead and type an exclamation point. If you want to contribute to the discussion. Please type the exclamation point because it's easier for me to see who the order in which people I can call on people. Dmitry and then Madeline. Go ahead, Dmitry. Dmitry, I think you're muted.
Yes, I wanted to come back to the point that you made about homunculus, that creature which was made by Wagner and which is made of glass, perishable glass, and again, it seems to me that at this point we see some kind of, again, human striving, Faustian striving, Man, Wagner tries to imitate nature, creative nature, except that and again, he does it unsuccessfully, I mean, homunculus is made of very fragile glass, at the end of the part, we see that, no, not the part at the end of the act, we see that he shattered on the beach because he's made of glass. And I can quote here, it says, "Whether, Papa, how now, it was no jest, clutch me affectionately to your breast, but not too roughly, or the glass might shatter. Such is, you see, a property of matter. Things natural find all the world's scant space, while things synthetic want a sheltered place." So we see human striving, Faustian striving, and in the end we see that human reason. After we see that at the end that the homunculus is shattered, glass is shattered at the end. So we see that human reason is somehow inferior to nature's organic randomness, because to the process of evolution, to how things evolve, So man tries to imitate nature, but unsuccessfully again. And that seems to be one of the essential points of this second act, this unsuccessful striving to imitate nature and ending in total failure. Yes.
Okay, well, that's an interesting interpretation. I have a slightly different one, but I appreciate you saying that. Let's see, Madeline and then Allison.
Oh, yeah, well, definitely, Dmitry, I agree. So I saw the basic structure of this act as they're like, okay, Wagner's done all the work. He's created a homunculus, but he's a boring guy, so we're going to ditch him. And the three of us are going to go off to Greece. And so they do that, and then Mephistopheles says, let's split up. So we're following each of the three separately on different tracks, the upper and lower slopes. I liked Nereus, the water god, he's kind of a grumpy bear because he's like, everyone comes to me. They say, oh God, please give me advice. I give them advice. Do they follow it? No, they don't. Paris came to me. I told him what would happen. I said, don't go after that foreign girl, as he calls her, but he did. And I warned Ulysses, and nobody listens. So, but now my daughters are coming. So I'm in a good mood. And his daughter Galatea, who's coming, the milk white goddess, apparently has a very ancient association with the great goddess of underground. And a lot of these trios of goddesses and other groups of goddesses and gods who are mentioned in this act all have that association. Not every single one, but a lot of them do. With the very ancient Greek and even pre-Greek mystery temples of various kinds. I thought one of the most, so there was Thales, who believed that water is everything. There was, I think it was Anaxagoras, was the fire guy, and believed that things were cataclysmic. And then here at the very end, basically on the very last page of this act, here is the homunculus. Oh, and what you said, Phil, that was very interesting, the end of Aristotelianism, because I noticed that Mephistopheles convinced the three women, said, why don't you combine into two instead of three? And as two instead of three make do, the extra shape you then could lend to me, pro tem. So basically he is taking a form from them, like a Platonic form, as one of them. And then he's concerned, but dear me, when I think the shame of it, they'll jeer as I pass by, hermaphrodite. Now we come to the very end. We have Proteus, Nereus, and homunculus. And the main question here seems to be, how is homunculus going to get himself turned from a pure spirit behind glass into an embodied being? And what happens is that he is going around her, and it's not that clear who her is in this section. And there, a flash, a bright flame, and he's spilt in the sea. And then the sirens are saying, hurrah for the ocean, hurrah for the waves, and their crests with the sacred fire ablaze. Hurrah for their union so rare with each other. And the passage before that, when they're speaking, basically they're describing bioluminescence. The waves as they break, shooting out sparks of fire, every creature aflame as it swims through the night. And I thought that this was really so there was the uniting of Thales and Anaxagoras. There is the leaving, the soul doesn't get a single body, but rather goes into a sort of panpsychism, which I think is what Goethe was going after here, which is how I believe he was really trying to say that all matter becomes alive and is ensouled in some way. And I think that was part of his, why he was doing things in such an encoded and storied way, because it would have been heretical during his time.
Sorry, can you repeat that last part? What will be heretical?
Panpsychism, to say
Oh.
that the soul inhabits everything,
Hmm.
everything that there is in a sort of protean, bioluminescent way. Whereas earlier, homunculus had been told, oh, you're going to have to start at the bottom and go through many incarnations and eventually work your way up to being human. But here, as he dashes his glass against the rock of her, whoever her is, he spills out into everything everywhere. And so kind of joins the world, but not in a specific way. So I'd say panpsychism, really.
Okay, interesting thought. Allison.
A couple thoughts that I thought was that the name homunculus was sort of a play on the words for clouds, like alto cumulus. I just thought it was interesting. Like, I was wondering if it's kind of like a cloud is creating rain, and this thing is like sort of a person, but not quite. I don't know if he intended that or not, but that's one thing I was thinking.
Well, it's a diminutive in Latin. So homunculus literally means a small man.
Oh, it does. Oh, okay.
Like a mannequin.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
The other thing that I thought was just funny was that when they get to Greece, and Mephistopheles, like before in the first part, he's just like walking around like he's the king of the world, doing whatever he pleases. And then he gets to Greece and it's like they're just roasting him. Like there's a scene where like the Lamy, they're drawing the Mephistopheles after them, and they said, "Now hurry, hurry." It's so amusing to be seducing this old whore master who would seduce us. He will be sorry as a dud foot. Look at his club foot hobbling and limping. Like they're just, like he doesn't have that power of the devil anymore. He's just ripped to shreds. And then he keeps trying to chase after them. And it's like, oh, this one turns into a stick, and this one turns into a pigtail, slimy as a snake. And it's just funny to like see him cut down to size, and then I guess one thing I was just confused is how he arrived, and I haven't read farther, so I don't know what's coming next, but they arrive there, and then it's just like every mythological creature you can think just popping up here and there, and I kept like going, why? I mean, I get they're in Greece, but where are they going with this? And so I don't know yet. I guess we'll just keep reading and find out. But what I like though is that it's so interesting, and I kept looking them up, going, wood nymph. Okay, this is trying to figure them all out. Yeah, and I've kind of realized I feel like sometimes with this book, if I try to figure out every little thing as I go along, it's not going to make any sense. That sometimes I have to just sort of like go with it, and then eventually it makes sense. It's like he's just taking you down this path, and you just kind of have to go. And then as you go along, then, oh, that thing back there, now that I understand what that meant.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably a good strategy with Goethe. As we were talking earlier, comparing Goethe to Dante, Dante is much more detail oriented and much more kind of schema oriented, right? It's all about a very, very detailed and very organized way of presenting everything,
Right.
starting from his geography that he makes up of all these worlds. With Goethe, again, this is kind of the Faustian modern way of doing things. It's more of a zigzags, right? We start in this section where we started in the very beginning of the play, in the study, which is unusual, right? You don't think you're going to end up where you started. Like, what's the point, right? We're going in circles now. But then you go off somewhere completely different. Also, in some ways, it's very prefiguring, I would say, Hegelian ideas of synthesis, right? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, where you have things that are antithetical, and they produce something. This something is actually closely related to both the thesis and antithesis, but it's not the same. And then that in itself then has some sort of movement, and you just keep going in these sort of concentric circles, but it seems like you might end up in the same place, but you don't. You end up somewhere different. So when we end up at the study, yes, the books are the same, the manuscripts are the same, and yet something is different. The student is no longer a student, he is now graduate. Wagner is no longer just a kind of pedantic repeater of old truths. He is now doing his own research, and not just anything, he is creating a man in the retort and apparently succeeding at it. Or again, that's the interesting part, is does he actually succeed at it, or is it just Mephistopheles contorting the process in his own favor? And by the way, Homunculus calls him cousin, a rogue and a cousin. So there's obviously some connection there. And then there's also a hint that Mephistopheles is involved in creation, because he says we have to sometimes bear the consequences of things that we create. And I thought that was very Mary Shelley-like, with Frankenstein and Golem, and a lot of these more modern works. By the way, Mary Shelley wrote her Frankenstein, I think, 10 years before Goethe published his work. So this was already on the a well-known work by the time Goethe finished his work. So definitely by the time he was writing part 2. So all these concepts, all these ideas of artificial creation, artificial synthesis of nature were already in the air, So anyway, that's why it makes it so interesting. Anyone else who wants to share, go ahead and type in exclamation mark in the chat. I'm going to go through, I want to touch on another interpretation of homunculus. And I'm curious what you guys think about that. So here's what I was thinking about. So homunculus is an artificial life, an artificial being that's created. How does it relate to Faust? How does it relate to the Faustian quest for meaning and for escaping the limitations of being human, I guess, to a degree? So in a lot of ways, homunculus is a possible answer. And what is the answer? Well, he is a purely spiritual being. Yes, he is he's contained in a glass jar, but he is a spirit. And when the glass breaks, the spirit leaves. Now, some say that there's an interpretation that says that he actually dies when the glass breaks. There's another interpretation, and I think I favor that one more, is that he doesn't die. He actually merges with the sea. He merges with Galatea. Galatea is the symbol of the feminine, the erotic symbol in the scene, and homunculus is drawn to her. He's drawn to her because he wants to be more than just an idea, right? An abstraction. That's what he is. When he's born, he is just an idea, essentially. An idea contained in a glass jar, a purely spiritual thing, a completely abstract thing. And he has tremendous mental capabilities, right? He's actually smarter than Mephistopheles. He knows more than Mephistopheles, it seems. But at the same time, that's not enough. That's not enough for him. He, just like Faust, he is not satisfied. He's terribly dissatisfied with his life because he is just an idea without actual representation. He's an idea that is not incarnated in any way into real world. And that's what he wants to be. He wants to be really part of the real life that he sees, that he observes, especially in the richness of the classical tradition. So he is asking the philosophers, and he's asking Mephistopheles, he's asking everybody, how do I essentially, almost like Nicodemus, how do I get born again? I mean, that's the connection with Nicodemus, right? When he comes to Jesus, he says, how can a man's, what does a man need to do to see heaven? And Jesus says you need to be born again. You need to be regenerated. You need to have some new life, some new spiritual existence. For homunculus, in some ways, he's asking the same question. But he is a spirit who wants to be flesh. Nicodemus is flesh who wants to be spirit. That's the connection there. And again, I don't know if Goethe was thinking along those lines. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But it just seems to be uncanny how those two stories are intertwined. Nicodemus says, how can a man who, when he's old, be born again? And homunculus asks, how can I, as a pure spirit, become a flesh, become matter, become this chaotic, part of this chaotic existence? He wants to experience life. And I think what strikes me is that at the end of his demise or his transformation, however you want to interpret this, there's a reference to Eros. Eros, of course, is the ancient god of love, not the Cupid, not the Roman representation of that, but the Greek, the ancient Greek representation, which is a god who is actually older than most of the other gods. Eros is the key to the primordial generation of everything. And in some ways, perhaps this description of homunculus's brief existence is in itself a description of what Faust is seeking for, as some sort of union, some sort of merging with the feminine. Because throughout the story, Faust is trying to reach for the feminine, for either for Gretchen or for Helen, or for something he's not sure what it is yet. And he's been failing up to this point, but maybe homunculus has reached that point, has reached the point of this complete and perfect union with the feminine. And of course, the feminine, what does that represent? Well, it represents beauty, it represents poetry, it represents the arts, things that are perhaps give meaning to life, right? And for Goethe, of course, it was probably true in his own experience. We're talking about his Italian trip with Doug, how that the northern sort of privation versus the cornucopia of Italian landscape and the beauty and the lavishness of the art in Italy. I mean, that was probably such a contrast to him. And certainly that had a huge impact on him and on his ideas about what it means to be a complete person, a complete artist and poet, etc. So those are some of my thoughts. Dmitry, go ahead.
Yes, so I wanted to, that's an interesting interpretation. It's a little different from my interpretation. I don't know how different, but the thing is, what you're mentioning is interesting. You're saying that homunculus is trying to become more than he is in some way, and that reminds me of Data from Star Trek, also an artificial creature,
right,
who wants to become human somehow, or more human, in his quest for his striving to become more human. So that's something that you reminded me in your interpretation.
Let me bring in another thread here. So Galatea, we haven't really talked much about her. Galatea, and I don't know if this was again intentional by Goethe or not. Galatea, there are two personas in Greek mythology that are associated with this name. One is the Nereid, that we talked about that. She is the daughter of, who's she daughter of? Nereus and someone else, Ceto, or no, not Ceto, somebody else. But anyway, she's a daughter of Nereus. But the other Galatea that's mentioned in mythology is from the story of Pygmalion, the sculptor who falls in love with his work of art. He sculpts a beautiful woman, and he falls in love with her. And then he begs Aphrodite to make her alive. Now, isn't this interesting? I mean, we're talking about exactly this concept, right? We want homunculus, who is this kind of spiritual abstract being. He wants to be flesh and blood. And we have exactly the same story in Galatea, right? She is a form of beauty, but not really alive. She is representation of that, but not, not flesh and blood. And of course, for Pygmalion, he wants a real woman. After he looks at her, he wants more than an ideal. I guess that's the way to really express it. He wants more than an ideal, because ideal is not enough. And I think that was one of the things that comes out in Goethe, especially as a dialogue that he has with the German idealists at the time. And his retort to them is, it's not enough to just have some idea of beauty or some concept of beauty. It needs to be incarnated in real human experience. That's the value. That's where the real value comes in. And of course, again, this harkens back to the introduction of the play. And we have the director, the comic, and the poet. These three characters are constantly at play throughout the work. I hope you noticed that, because we have the comical, we have the ideal, and then we have sort of like this pragmatic strain throughout that ties it all together. The synthesis, you can think of perhaps the director as the synthesis of the comical and the ideal. And we have this really beautifully portrayed in various episodes of this. Think of the emperor and his empire failing. I mean, there's nothing more practical than inflation. And it just comes out beautifully there. But then we're back at the search for meaning, because that really is the ultimate, right? It doesn't matter, you have to have that too. You have to have the beautiful, that issue resolved. So yeah, so Galatea to me is another interesting character in terms of interpreting the major themes in this passage. Madeline, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Phil. On the theme of the arts, and the replication or the attempted replication of the life, but in like say Pygmalion's statue of Galatea. Proteus says, let them go on singing, bragging. Those dead works to the life bestowing, sacred sunlight are a joke. Untiringly those people work at smelting bronze, and when it's cast, see, a marvel is their boast. But what's the end with all of these grandly standing god effigies? Along a quake comes, knocks them flat, and all that grandeur's sold for scrap. So the gods think that at least Proteus, who can change shape at any time and still be a living god, think that the arts are really kind of pointless, unenduring, and lifeless, and that people should not be concerned with these. On the other hand, throughout, the gods are definitely in favor of sexual reproduction. They make fun of any attempts to create any kind of life without having sex, without eros. And it's a very, very old theme, I believe, in the pre-Socratic philosophy. There are two underlying forces to the universe that precede the gods and govern them. So there are the three fates, whatever those are called, but the forces are what we might call causality or necessity, and that gets called love, the thing that binds things together, and then strife, also known as chaos, which is what takes them apart. And various pre-Socratic philosophers had different ideas about how love and strife work together. But I think that that's one of the things at play here.
Interesting. Yeah. No, that's an interesting point. I haven't thought of it this way. Yeah, I'll have to think about that one. Dimitri, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to add maybe a little argument in favor of my interpretation, because I mean, you can build all kinds of arguments, but one of the arguments, if you look at the end of the act, you know, when after homunculus is shattered, there is a hymn to four elements, which is water, air, earth, and fire, right? So these are natural elements, right? So this goes in support of my argument that there is a distinction between natural process of evolution, of creation, and artificial human process of evolution, of creation of homunculus. So after homunculus is shattered, there is a hymn to nature. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's like nature is praised at the end, at the expense of the human, at the expense of Wagner, who creates shattered homunculus. Do you know what I mean? So that's just my interpretation of it.
Right. No, that's interesting. I thought, I mean, it could be said that, you know, those four primary substances is what is left after homunculus is shattered. Because again, if you remember some of those pictures I showed in the beginning there, the idea is you take the chaos of the prima materia, and the prima materia is essentially the four substances in a chaotic state, right? It's all mixed up, there's no order to it. And then at the end, you end up with this homunculus being. So what happens if you destroy? Well, theoretically, you should get back to where you started, which is chaos and the four substances. So that is interesting, and perhaps that's, you know, that supports the theory that he actually is his demise, that he's not perfectly joined to anything, to Galatea, to beauty, to feminine, to the sea, because what they were trying to tell him is you have to go back to the sea. The sea is the source of life, and of course that was a predominant scientific notion at that time already, that everything came from the sea. The sea was the ocean was the cradle of life, which we believe today to be the case. but anyway, that idea is not new. It was, of course, it was suggested actually by, I believe, by Thales. So that was,
Thales.
yeah. So that was like a old idea, but it was resurrected with new evidence. But what happens? What happens to him, to homunculus as a being when he's shattered? That doesn't seem like maybe something.
We
good
really
for
have
him.
to put different interpretations on it,
Yeah.
Or maybe
yeah.
he survives, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyone else who wants to join in and express their thoughts on this? Feel free. We don't have a lot of folks here, so everybody, please don't be shy. In the meantime, I'm just going to look through my notes to see if there's any other thoughts that I wanted to mention.
I am, while you're looking, Phil, I'm
Mhm.
wondering if anyone remembers from part one. Wasn't there a part where Mephistopheles has taken Faust up to the mountain and he is dancing with various women and they turn ugly and weird?
Yeah, that's the Walpurgis Night. Mhm.
Okay, and so that's exactly what happens here, but with Mephistopheles in the place of Faust.
Right, the roles are somewhat reversed in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the point that you made and that Allison made is a good one, which is that Mephistopheles, I mean, they say quite clearly to him at some point, I believe it was the sirens who said, you've got to get out of your home way of thinking. Everything is different here. Your idea of burning in hell and sin, it's not happening here.
Mhm.
And even in the way that he's perceived, in the north, everyone's like, oh my God, he's got the cloven hoof. Ah, and in the south, it's like, oh, look, he's got a clubfoot. So it's a very different kind of perception of Mephistopheles. And he also doesn't seem to have the powers here that he had. He seems more like Faust, I'm stumbling up a rocky path and, now I'm meeting these strange creatures. I think
Yeah, it's almost like, I don't know if there are movies like that, but imagine if you had like fairy tales and you have heroes from different fairy tales kind of visiting the other fairy tale where they're not really in their own element, so to speak. It almost seems like that, right? He's a
Oh
gift.
yeah, this is like a crossover episode.
Yep. Yep, exactly like that. But yeah, again, it speaks to this idea of how do you synthesize these various traditions. So Dante had an idea about that, right? And he basically puts all the classical creatures either in heaven or in hell. They're either saintly or devilish. Goethe doesn't do that. He puts all of them into the separate camp, even the evil ones, or what we might call evil, right? The Lamii, right? The vampire-like creatures, some of these ugly creatures, that all the sirens. I mean, they're all kind of evil in a sense, right? They essentially trap sailors and murder them, etc. But they're not relegated to heaven, hell, or anything Christian at all. They're in their own world. It's like a parallel world, parallel tradition, and something that apparently is needed to revive Faust. And that in itself is a very interesting thought, that you need more than one worldview that is salvific, right? You need something more than just the right and wrong of the Christian tradition. You might perhaps need the beautiful and the ugly of the classical, perhaps. Again, I'm just spitballing. I don't know I don't know if that's what Goethe was trying to do, but the world he paints is really a world of these parallel universes, and we seem to be whizzing from one world to another, from the Gothic chamber, the laboratory, into the classical Aegean seaside. So it's yeah, it seems to suggest that these are parallel universes, but they are important in terms of the search for meaning and the search for lasting satisfaction.
Yes, I believe it was Goethe who first coined the term world literature.
Mhm.
And he did believe that we either needed to, or the world is evolving towards a sort of world culture,
Mhm.
where people of different cultures come together and do some comparative mythology and comparative philosophy and start putting it all together. And so maybe that's what he was trying to do here.
Possibly. I also want to jump back for a second, back to the conversation between Mephisto and the baccalaureate. This is around line 6785. And the reason I'm jumping back is because there's a funny passage there talking about the old and the new. And according to the baccalaureate, let me just see if I can find this line. Did I write this correctly? Oh yeah. So the baccalaureate says, I swear old age is like a frigid fever of aches and shakes and crotches bred. One who is 30 years or over already is as good as dead. So I thought that was very apropos of the world that we're living in, and this age-old, children versus parents, and older generation versus younger generation. Obviously a perennial question of how do you deal with, is it the wisdom of the old age, or is it the prejudices of the old age and the kind of being stuck in their ways? And of course, baccalaureate says, okay, if you're 30 years old, that's it, you're done. Yeah, you're as good as dead, so we should really not listen to you. Of course, Mephistopheles at the end there says, recall the devil, he's old. Grow old yourself and he'll make sense. Anyways.
I think it was right before that, though,
Mhm.
when Mephistopheles first sees him, he issues quite a deft put down. He says, "Oh, look at you, all grown up. I remember you. Your hair was curly, and you were so pleased with yourself in your student robes." And so it may be that part of the baccalaureate's, what he says is a response to that. But I think it's also deeper, because since Goethe wrote this when he was much older, this section, it's also sort of how, when you're older, do you respond to that naive condescension of the young? It's sort of painful to remember having done it oneself.
Yeah.
And now that I'm older, I'm like, oh, they were so nice to me when I was doing that, all those older people. How do I be that nice?
Right. Well, of course, Mephisto, he's not about being nice. He's about sarcasm and yeah, and turning everything on its head. So, of course, he knows better. He knows that Baccalaureus is going to be an old man himself very soon, even without realizing it. Anyway, I thought that was just an interesting comical interlude in this otherwise pretty serious and philosophical discussion. Joe, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I would never actually just come in and just make a comment, but literally one of the things that actually had stuck out to me in this section was about Baccalaureus, and just the pure arrogance that he demonstrates. It's like this, it's just something where and I found it interesting when Mephistopheles it's like he doesn't even know he's speaking to the devil, and there's this ignorance. It's almost like it's a joke, and I find that true to be of youth in general.
Those millennials.
Exactly. And I hate this, and I hate to say it like that, but it's that was one of the things that actually I found to be most interesting about that interaction and that section in general was but
Perhaps, sorry if I may interrupt,
no,
but I'm trying
please,
to make your point for you.
please.
Perhaps the line you want to quote there, speaking of arrogance, is this one: "The world was not until I made it be."
Right, exactly. And he's saying, yeah, I mean, it's like, and he's saying this, and it's like, do you know who you're talking to? And
Yeah.
and so it was and I had some other thing that I'm trying to find my words for. I'm just walking into the middle of this though. And just one of the other things that I found interesting, and just building off that section in general, was Wagner's role as well.
Hmm.
I thought that was
What
particular.
what did you think of it?
Well, in the sense that he doesn't go to classical Walpurgis Night.
Mhm.
I thought that was significant, and like that he's assured fame or an assured success, and somehow that says something to me. Like that's all the world is to him. That's all he really cares about. It's a very narrow way of looking at
But
the
it sounds
world.
like he wishes he could go.
It does, but it sounds like he's satisfied too with pursuing. It sounds like he wishes he could go, but he doesn't, and he it sounds like he's satisfied with what Faust wasn't satisfied with. He's content in a way that being famous, being an intellect. And that to me is somewhat, I think I find that to be significant in a number of ways. I think it represents the way a lot of people pursue knowledge, in a way that they look at success as more fame or things or that they're doing, versus actually experiencing the world. And I think that's a distinction that's even though he's responsible for creating Hermocles, if I'm
Are you
saying
being
that.
too harsh on Wagner?
Well, I don't think so. I really don't. It's maybe I mean, you tell me. I got to tell you that this section's all like,
Yeah, he doesn't
after
strike
reading.
me as a materialist kind of guy. Like, let's make $1 million and
But
retire.
if you even though think about how he felt towards the townspeople when
Oh
he was
yeah, but
walking
that was right. So that's what
in the
we're,
beginning.
yeah, that's where we started, Joe, before he came. So we were talking about that we kind of made a full circle, that we're back at the study essentially where we started
Right.
in part one. But is it the same? And it's the same and yet not the same. It's almost like, again, this Hegelian type of thing, right? Is the thing equal to itself? Well, yes and no. It is equal because it's the same study, it's the same books, it's the same manuscript, everything is untouched. Here's the blood of Faust that he used to make the deal with the devil. Everything is preserved. On the other hand, what happens to the people? Well, the student is now not a student anymore. He's baccalaureate. Wagner is himself a doctor. So everybody's progressing, it seems. The world doesn't stop, right? The world keeps going. Things are progressing. And Wagner, by the way, is not just peddling some second-rate dissertations. He's actually doing research. He is actually creating something amazing. Homunculus, a man in a retort. So it seems like he has some vitality around him. And the question I would pose is also the following. Is he seeking an alternative way of achieving something meaningful, a way that is alternative to the Faust way? And that's where I think, Joe, you were talking about experience versus just learning. Faust is tired of learning in the beginning, right? He is tired of sitting there and poring over old manuscripts. He wants to get out into the fresh, the world, the nature, the experience of it. Wagner is still in the laboratory. He's creating this homunculus in vitro, specifically because he doesn't want, and of course, Mephisto, he says, his reply to Wagner's claim that he's making a new person is, well, where's the couple? Where's the amorous couple that you, where did you hide them?
Yeah.
in the lab. And Mephisto and Wagner says, no. I don't want to do it the real way, the natural way. And I think Dmitri was making also some was putting some emphasis on that he is anti-nature in a sense. He wants to control nature.
Sure.
He wants to have sort of technological control over the process of creation, right? Which is almost like being God in a sense, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, God is the one who gives life, and here's Wagner creating life in a little bottle, so in a retort. So that's a huge step. By the way, we still haven't done that, right? We're still a long ways from that, if ever we can achieve that. So that's an alternative way. But what is he creating? He's not actually creating a little human being, a little baby. He's creating something that's far more interesting. He's created this absolute abstract spirit that has seemingly unlimited mental capability, unlimited spatial and temporal capabilities, right? They're flying away. How is Mephisto flying with Faust? Well, Mephisto has to use his cloak or some kind of paraphernalia, some accessories, if you will. How does homunculus fly? Well, he just flies. So he can traverse space and time. He is an amazing being. And yet, this is where we stop. He is not complete. He yearns for something more. And that's so like Faust. It's like they're the two halves of perfection. Faust is natural, but he wants to have this abstract beauty and some kind of abstract meaning, ultimate meaning. Homunculus, on the other hand, has all that, but he wants to be embroiled in the vicissitudes of material life. So anyway, super interesting contrast there. I'll stop talking because I think Madeline wants to say something, and Allison.
No, but thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for letting me chime in.
That was just a review of last 30 minutes. Madeline, do you want to say something?
Yeah, first of all, Joe, it's great to see you here. I'm glad you found time to come. Allison, if you have something to say on this theme, go ahead, because I was going to change the topic.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Allison, go ahead, then I'll return to Madeline.
I was just going to say, when you were talking about, them returning to the study and everything is the same, but not the same. And I was thinking that it's kind of like when you grow up, you leave your house, and then you come back to your childhood house and you look and everything looks exactly the same, but yet nothing is the same because you've changed, because you've had all these experiences. And, it's a very almost surreal thing, because while you're out having those experiences, you don't always notice the changes. Mm-hmm. But there's something about you walk into your little childhood bedroom and it's like, it really hits you over the head. So, and I think it's kind of interesting with, like, I remember reading one time, like a lot of actors, like they try to pick a role where the character is going to have an arc and they're going to change during the course of the movie. And, sometimes they don't, and many people don't really change, and they have this kind of the same thing, same personality throughout the whole thing. But sometimes what's interesting is when they do go through a transformation. So I'm still skeptical that Faust is going to redeem himself, but so far I don't know. I don't find him to be very likable, but we'll see. I'll keep fingers crossed.
Right. Okay. Allison, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, Madeline.
That's all right. I knew you meant me.
Yeah.
Yeah, Allison, that's a good point. I'm wondering now, would Mephistopheles have a character arc after his grand tour of Europe down in the South? What I had been thinking about as a somewhat different topic is Helen. Because here we have Faustus jonesing over Helen. Helen, 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 take me to Helen. Where is Helen? I want Helen, Helen, Helen. And that really is, it's a plot device. In that, so I guess in the first part, it kind of showcased Mephistopheles and his powers, how he manipulated people and arranged circumstances. And I think in this one, it's more of a plot device to move us through the ancient world with Faust. So first he's with some group, I forget which one it was. Then he's with Chiron. Then he's with Manto. Then he's with Proteus. So we're kind of getting this tour of the ancient world through him. Another thing that I thought was, this is completely different topic, but speaking of tour of the ancient world, is the part where Mephistopheles is talking with the Sphinxes. They ask him 3 riddles, or not even riddles, just the first 2 are just questions. They say, what's your name? He's like, oh, name, what's in a name, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't answer. Then they say, well, can you tell us what time it is? He says, oh, I'm looking up at the stars, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't answer. Then they ask him a riddle, which I certainly couldn't figure out. And I noticed that in the section on the Sphinxes, the passages about them end fairly consistently with, but we won't stir from our place. And Sphinxes don't budge, not a step. And that kind of, and here we are again, our seat is sacred, no one dare disturb us. And that's kind of a refrain for them, is they're eternal. They are human above and beast below, which Mephistopheles comments on. Even though, from our perspective, they are things made by human beings. They're enormous works of art. Perhaps in this, we're meant to take them as literal sphinxes, not as the stone representations. Also, Phil, I'm wondering, do you know the answer to that riddle?
Can you remind me what that was? Because I don't.
Sure. It was, let's see. I'm going to go. I'm in the Sphinx section. I'm not finding. Oh, I see what happens. Faust comes in between, so there are actually 2 Sphinx sections. So the riddle was, so they introduce it by saying, say what you are, that's riddle enough for us. Try, do once some self-analysis. So here's the riddle. As needful to the best as to the worst. The best, to learn the self-denying skill by which to foil your wicked cut and thrust. The worst, a fellow helping to raise hell, and both to Zeus a comedy, a jest. This is around line 73-61.
Yeah, I didn't take it as a riddle. I took it as a description of sort of his modus operandi, because it's essentially just saying that he is an agent of evil for the evil people, and he's an agent of good for the good, and then he's also kind of like a jester, court jester for God. So in a sense, classically.
Oh, yeah, okay, I see.
Yeah, I didn't take it. Maybe it was meant as a riddle, but it seems like it's somewhat self-descriptive of him anyway, because that's what he. Remember how he introduced himself to Faust? I'm part of that force that ever wishes to do evil and always ends up doing good, or something like that. So that's his. It's basically repeating that in a slightly different way.
Okay, thanks.
Dimitri, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to refer to many occurrences of ocean in the whole work in Faust. Ocean seems to be everywhere. We start with an ocean because Goethe says life is a teeming ocean, something that all live in it, not many know it. So we start with a description of ocean, and ocean comes up in many places here, like where does life spring from ocean, from water, right? And in general, many people associate religious feeling with an oceanic feeling. Like Freud, for example, he said that I never experienced oceanic feeling. That it's a religious feeling. Do you know what I mean? It's like feeling. Freud was not a religious person. He didn't believe in God. He says, I never experienced oceanic feeling, meaning religious feeling. And Goethe was a very religious person. He was a pantheist, you know, so he was like part of that ocean. It's the spirit that pervades this ocean that we live in. You know?
Interesting. Yeah, interesting point. Huh. Yeah, there are a lot of and there are a lot of deities specifically associated with the ocean here as well, of course. So you have the Nereus, you have the Tritons, you have a bunch of different ones here towards the end. And of course, you have the two philosophers, of whom Thales is the one that promulgates the idea that the ocean is the kind of the bedrock, the seat of life, the source of life, and all that. Proteus, and you have, yeah, it's interesting. And then we have the we have the ocean, and then you have the mountains, right? So you have kind of these two opposing forces, and you have the nymphs associated with, Nereids are essentially nymphs associated with the ocean, and then you have the Oreads, which are nymphs associated with the mountains. And to your point, Dmitry, I guess this idea that everything is alive, everything breathes some sort of living spirit, right? It's not just a rock, it's not just water that's going, back and forth like this. There's some kind of living force in it. And of course, when you, as a poet, when you look at, or as just a human being, really, when you look at the ocean, the sheer force of it, I mean, it's hard to say that it's inanimate, right? It doesn't seem inanimate. It seems like it has some sort of potential, like of like a living potential in it. Mountains, I don't feel the same way about mountains necessarily, but ocean definitely. Maybe it's the dynamism. But of course, you have Seismus, another character here, and he's shaking up the mountains. And that's the dynamic part about them, is they're not standing still either. They're also alive. And as Joe, this is probably for your benefit mostly, I was alluding to the Italian Journey, which is the travelogue that Goethe wrote about his travels in Italy. And one of the things he visited there was Mount Etna, which of course was actually active, I think, at the time. So in one of his entries there, he says, saw some clouds above it, maybe people are saying you might be active again, and it is still active. And so it's dynamic, and so it's not perhaps as static and lifeless as we tend to think of it. And of course, Mount Olympus and the Parnassus, they're all results of this volcanic life force, right?
And it seems to be that this opposition of mountains and ocean goes back to opposition between the dualistic view of religion, where you have earth and heaven. Heaven is up there; it's in the mountains somewhere, Mount Olympus. You know what I mean? And you have this pantheistic, oceanic view, where spirit is all around us. So that there are two religious views. We seem to be opposed in the ocean-mountain opposition.
Interesting.
See what I'm saying?
Right. Mm-hmm. I want to go back for a second to exploring this idea that Faust is constantly searching for the feminine, reaching out to the feminine. Of course, part one was all about Gretchen. I mean, that was the focal point of that, and everything else was really kind of dressing around that. And then part 2, it's Helen. But in general, there seems to be something about this quest that is not going to be resolved just purely academically or purely, it has to be something living, something experiential, but specifically it's the search for the feminine, whether it's Helen, of course, is the representation of feminine beauty and this artistic, like the epitome of artistic beauty or just beauty, period. And so it's interesting that Faust is so dead set on finding her. She's had such an impression on him. And I'm curious, what do you guys think about that kind of in the scheme of things? Is there some sort of deeper philosophical truth here that in general, mankind needs to have kind of both sides of that equation? And I know in our culture, we seem to oscillate between the male and the feminine. And, some people are saying future is female. And I feel like that's just going to be another imbalance if we go that route, where we really need the future to be both male and female at the same time, a perfect unison, a harmony versus one in favor of the other. But in Faust, it seems to be definitely imbalanced, and there's definitely a search for some kind of unity, union, joining with the feminine. And homunculus, of course, is another kind of hint or representation of that. He wants to join the sea, and there's Eros there again. There's some kind of love force that love, of course, we associate with merging, in the biological sense, right? It's merging, it's union. But in a more philosophical sense, it's this idea of bringing two things that are not alike and making something new out of that, not in a retort, but in a organic way. So anyway, just some thoughts out loud, I guess. Allison, go ahead.
I think the mistake that he's making is that he's compartmentalizing his life. So he's having his intellectual pursuits, and then he has this pursuit of a woman that's all based on physicality. And that's why he's failing, because he's not realizing that what he really needs is a woman who is both the physical and the intellectual.
Interesting.
Because it's like, I just think of it as like the Bill Clinton, mistake. Dividing your life into the intellectual over here and the physical. Like, if you find both, then that's where it gets,
Right. And to make it even more close to that parallel and political, because remember, we were just at the court of the emperor trying to solve empire problems, right? So we jump around quite a bit. We go from witchcraft to romance, and then back to nature, and now back to the classical scene. So there's a lot of stops on the way that we're making, all trying to answer a question: where is that fleeting moment where Faust can say, stop, moment, this is enough. This is so beautiful, this is so fulfilling. And he's going to say it. I know I'm giving it away a little bit, he is going to say it. So we're on the search, almost like what's that Amazing Race, or one of those shows where we're on a search for something, and we're going to make 1,001 stops in between and try every different angle of looking at life. And the way that Goethe does it, he doesn't do it in a kind of again, in a very prescribed manner. It's more like a random walk. We're zigzagging, we're back and forth, we're in Germany, and then we're back in Greece. Now we're on the mountain with the witches, then we're somewhere else. I mean, it's just like this wild goose chase, but it is taking us around the world in a sense, right? In terms of worldviews and philosophy and different sort of ways of looking at things.
Well, I kept, in the last section, I kept wondering, like, why is he, what on earth was that whole section with the banking and the money? What on earth did that have to do with anything? And then it finally dawned on me, I was that if you keep printing money, you're devaluing the money. And so he's going around having so many experiences to the point where he's devaluing all the experiences. And rather than just focus on one experience and really going really deep with it and develop, we talked about depth and breadth a lot and, with this, but he's not doing that. And if he would just focus on one thing, then it would have more value and be more important. And up until now, anyway, he's not doing that. And
Right.
he's just not going into, with this Gretchen or this or whatever, he's not even taking the time to really get to know these women to see, maybe there is intelligence there, but he's on to the next, goodbye. He's not even paying any attention to what is actually there.
Right.
It's like you're on a train going the bullet train, you don't actually see anything, if you slow it down, you might actually see what's there.
Well, Dimitri, I'll give you talk about just a second. So remember the time when Faust asks Mephistopheles if there's another way for him to get rejuvenated, and Faust says, "Sure." Mephistopheles says, "Sure, just go to the farm. You can get rejuvenated. Get up at 6 a.m. with the cows. Feed the chickens. Do the do the routine. You'll be in good shape." in a couple of years. And Faust doesn't want to do it. Why doesn't he want to do it? It's too limiting. Faustian man, a man that is similar to like a Renaissance man in a sense, he wants to do everything. He doesn't want to be just a scientist. He doesn't want to be just a magician, just a politician, just this. He wants to be everything. That's kind of the plague of our own age, right? Nobody wants to be just one thing. We all want to be everything. And who is to say that we can't be, right? We're told from the earliest years that we can be everything we ever want to be. So if that's the case, why can't they be, a president and a saxophone player and the magician, the king, the lover, and everything else? So that's what Faust wants to be. He wants to be all these archetypes, and therefore being a farmer misses the mark. Just being Gretchen's lover misses the mark. And that's why we're on this wild goose chase. Is there something that can sort of encapsulate all of it in some sort of distilled manner? Maybe it's a fool's errand, right? But Goethe is, he doesn't barely think so. So we're on to the next thing. Dimitri, then Doug, and Madeline.
Yes, I just wanted to refer maybe because earlier you mentioned Hegel, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned his dialectic.
Yep.
And perhaps this dialectic between masculine and his aspiration for feminine, kind of is a he kind of anticipates Hegel a little bit in this dialectic of mass. He feels that this dialectic is exactly what striving represents, how you progress in the spiritual evolution of striving, between the dialectic of opposites and the synthesis, that results when two opposites collide, like negation,
Right.
double negation, or whatever the Hegel uses as his terms, So that's perhaps, I'm sorry. So that's basically my take on it, Perhaps that is how striving proceeds, through this masculine looking for feminine and finally producing something higher, something moving up.
No, that's exactly the idea. I think in the very beginning, when God and Mephistopheles make the bet, God says, "Well, as long as man is striving, he'll keep making mistakes." But the implication there is he's making smaller mistakes. Otherwise, it's just futility, right? If you're just making the same mistakes, it's pointless. But the idea is, as long as he keeps striving, he keeps improving. He keeps getting closer to me. I mean, that's the obvious interpretation there, or at least it seems to me that way. So you have some kind of error, and you have the right way, and the two collide, and then you have a smaller error, and possibly a way that's a little bit better. And homunculus is in some ways representative of that, where they're advising him to do this catastrophic thing. And what happens? Is it a synthesis that results in something? It's not clear. I mean, I kind of wish it was, but the evidence in the text is dubious.
It's not ambivalent. It's ambivalent.
Yeah, it's ambivalent. So yeah. Doug and Madeline. Doug, you're on mute.
There are a couple of little things I wanted to mention. I've mentioned Ibsen a few times, and I think Wagner and Ibsen pick up on themes that I think Goethe dealt with and many other playwrights. And the mountain is sort of the place where a rare few go to try to achieve the absolute and the real truth. And the valley is where really human people live, and the seasides as well, and the beaches. And this recurs throughout literature, I think, from the Greeks to that. And it's interesting that the mountaintop hints at something far above the mountains, and the ocean hints at something far below the surface of the ocean. So there are these other worlds above the mountaintop, which, you know, Dante certainly gets into, and then below the surface of the ocean. And what he's doing in Faust, I think Ibsen did with some of his Emperor and Galilean for sure. But then I had a teacher, a brilliant Ibsen teacher, who said in his last 12 plays, his quote, realistic plays, they were his most mythopoetic plays. And that under the surface of these apparently normal people, there lurked angels and trolls and beasts and other things, that under the surface of these nice parlor rooms, there were wild creatures living inside these people. And there's always this aspiration in some of the characters to achieve the great work that will illuminate and save humanity. And then one of those characters dies in Hedda Gabler, and his friend will take it on, but he's going to reduce this guy to his own pedantic level. It's like the scholar is going to dry all the life out of this young man who dies in a parody of almost a Dionysian death. And this teacher would talk about the last 12 plays as tracking Hegel's development of the spirit through the phenomenology of the mind, and also taking Hegel's theory of history and tracking the dramatics of each play. Early on, Ghost is very Greek, and The Wild Duck is very Shakespearean in its drama. And then When We Dead Awaken is the play where a character has achieved a great fame as a sculptor while deserting his early lover who's been wasting away. And he's reunited with her, and they climb a mountaintop or are consumed by an avalanche. And the woman he's married to, and sort of a companion, I think, of the woman, is almost like a lumberjack. And these two healthy people are singing songs as they go down the mountain to live life. And the, quote, heroes are ascending to be devoured by an avalanche. So there is this skepticism of getting too far away from life and the dialectical balance between male and female. The only other brief thing is I've been running into a lot of literature, and there's in the late 19th century, early 20th century, that deals a lot with the value of androgyny, or characters who are a mix of the male and female, and it starts popping up in Jung, who saw marriage as sort of the alchemical crucible, that, you know, you wouldn't just go off and play your good lines and great jokes on a new woman or a new man. You would sort of stay in a relationship where somebody got to know all your tricks and all your clever devices, and that leads to some progress that just leaping to the next experience doesn't. And so Jung saw that seems to connect to the old alchemical, the marriage of sun and moon, and the alchemical marriage of male and female, and these contradictions, these as Dmitri was pointing out with Hegel, and you know, the balance. So it's interesting how these themes of mountains and valleys and oceans and flying across the ocean, even Dickens in Christmas Carol, at one point Scrooge is taken by the ghost of present to travel around the whole world and see how people experience Christmas, from the isolated lighthouses in the Arctic regions or close to the Arctic, down to, you know, little families, mining families, to, you know, he takes them everywhere and shows how people can celebrate. And it's sort of teaching Scrooge how to celebrate, how to re-enter life. You know, that's and Christmas Carol is also an odd mix of pagan and Christian symbols, where the ghost of present is a Mars figure whose scabbard is empty and rusty. So it's like the swords have been turned into plowshares, and he's a god of fertility, Mars, not a god of war. And so this seems to be a major preoccupation from the 18th, 19th, 20th century. And Faust, Goethe seems to be a source for a lot of it. So
Yeah,
that's all.
speaking of mountains, let's not forget the mountain that the devil takes Christ on to show him all the kingdoms of the world and tempt him to bow to him. So there's your other mountain experience. And then, of course, in the valley, he's asking him to turn stones into bread and things like that.
Yeah, mountains and towers. Towers are another temptation. Leap off, the angels will save you, and get thee behind me, Satan. It's the heights and the depths. It's
Right.
very interesting.
One quick note, something you said, Doug, reminded me of this particular interesting side of this. So if you remember, Homunculus tries to suggest that they should go to classical Greece, and the way he succeeds is by tempting Mephisto. And the way he tempts him, he says, well, did you know what they have witches of Thessaly there? And I mean, that's just beautiful, because Mephisto is the tempter. He's the devil, the tempter, right? And yet Homunculus has the presence of mind and ingenuity to realize that he will not be able to withstand this temptation, and he's going to succumb to it. And sure enough, they go there, and Mephisto wants to see those witches just as much probably as Faust wants to see Helen. So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting side observation.
Well, I think Joseph's skepticism of Mephistopheles is sound in the sense that you project a lot of power onto him, and then you realize he's got a very narrow world he lives in, and there's whole worlds he doesn't understand, and he's actually afraid of. He's tempted by those witches, but I think when he meets them, I mean, isn't he terrified of them? I mean, he's sort of, it's like he's not the big man he pretends to be, you know.
Not at all. Not at all. Madeline.
Wow, this is fascinating. I'm going to try to put a few things together here from the discussion. At the very beginning, I was saying that I had been looking everything up as I went along, and Goethe had deliberately chosen groups of women who are an individual, not quite women, but women-shaped creatures, I'll say, of various kinds, supernatural beings, who are associated with the great goddess, the great underground goddess, with the mystery temples, as is Galatea. And often these are coming in threes. And I got off on a track looking for the place where I had come across where Mephistopheles comes across solid ground. And it's when he goes stumbling away from the Lamia, who are beings with snake-shaped lower bodies in some versions. And so that's extremely, extremely old. It turns up in other world mythologies. And then I came here on a level track. On rubble, I go stumbling back. It's just earthquakes and upheavals for the poor devil, so to speak. But then the Oread speaks, and it says, out of real natural rock, climb up here, my mountains old as time, and keeps its ancient slopes, its venerable granite steeps, the farthest reaching spurs of Pindus. Unshaken I stand as I did when over me great Pompeii fled. But that illusion there, false show, will vanish at the first cock crow. So she's a mountain nymph. She says I'm not an illusion. There are no earthquakes here. I am solid. And she's a mountain nymph who's associated with both a particular mountain and also with Artemis. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, and she's one of a three goddess trilogy. One is Selene, the goddess of the moon, and Hecate, who's another moon goddess. And so I'm thinking here, you know, in Goethe's Northern Europe, there's certainly the Holy Trinity, the male Trinity, way up in the sky, way up above ground, and the devil down below. Here in Greece, the gods, I believe, are distributed kind of equally. We're not really seeing anything of the Olympian gods. We're seeing mountain creatures, we're seeing ancient beings of various kinds, and we're seeing oceanic gods. But the Olympian gods so far have not put in an appearance. And perhaps he is bringing together the male and the female here by contrasting the northern Christianity as represented by the devil, because who else believes Satan is real except for Christians, really, or other religions that are outgrowths of Christianity, like Islam. And I think that here in Greece, he is putting it together with the unity of the deep underground great goddess, who we first saw, and I'm not even going to say the mother, because clearly they are not all maternal. Okay, they're virgins, they're huntresses, they do all sorts of things, but mommy is just one little part of that. And I think that the mommy role probably may come out of the north. I'm not sure. So I think that in part one, when Faust goes down to the mothers, the cauldron is mostly referred to as the tripod. And it's the deepest level to which he can go. And I think that prefigures these triple goddesses here, who are all related to the very ancient, I'd say deeply buried in time, rather than space, great goddess, who many of these refer to. And so that, I believe that this is where Goethe is saying, you know, here you stand on solid ground. Get away from the lusts and the temptations and the, you know, grabbing at women thinking they're beautiful, and then you think they're ugly. You're like that cast of Seinfeld, who's first, you know, they go out on a date, they're all excited, and then they're like, her thumbs are too large, you know, his ears have hair growing out of them, or whatever it is. It's sort of like that, I think. It's kind of a weird show, actually. So Eternal Lady. So Anaxagoras says, but now here we go with the difference. Anaxagoras says, till now I've praised the powers underneath. In this case, I direct my gaze on high. Eternal Lady, ageless and unchanged, triple shaped and triple named. My people perish, hear, do me, Luna, Diane, Hecate. Okay, so those are the triple moon, but they're also the three fates. So I think that here the goddess is also on high, in the form of the changing moon. Heart-inspiring, most profoundly serious, calm appearing, fiery, amorous. Yeah, that was it.
Okay, Madeline, that was a lot. Could you perhaps, can you summarize all of this into like main points, maybe? Because this was a lot, very interesting, but I don't know if everybody got the gist of it.
Oh, let's see, that was the gist of it. Oh, Doug, I'm sorry you're leaving.
Soon, not immediately. Soon.
Okay.
We're almost at time. So I guess what Madeline,
Okay.
what stood out to me.
I'll give it
mhm.
a quick try.
Mhm.
I think that we are, in this discussion, we're stuck in the Northern mentality. of God in a three-part male form is up above and the devil is down below.
Mhm,
And that who is also male.
mhm,
And Goethe is actually bringing about the union of male and female
mhm.
on that sort of Jungian alchemical sense by taking us to Greece and continually introducing us to the tripartite goddess, whether she's below ground or up in the sky, over and over and over again.
Okay.
And I think that he's trying to unify them in this part.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's exactly. I mean, that to me that resonates with the theme, for sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know about others, but to me that theme definitely is there. What struck me was your observation that we don't have any of the Olympian gods here. We only have these lower gods and goddesses kind of in between their offspring or whatnot. I wonder if that has anything to do with the fact that they're all identified or tied to specific material, not material, natural phenomena. You know, the oceans, the streams, the rivers. Again, we're dealing with romantic poetry and romanticism in general, which of course they looked at nature as alive, and everything in nature is almost an expression of some sort of living being, a living, in fact, is, you know, in a tree is just a form that a particular nymph takes, right? A dryad. It's not really a tree, etc. So that is I think that's a very interesting observation there about the types of characters that we're meeting. They're all either very old, archaic in a sense that they are primordial, right? The chthonic gods, the ones that were there kind of in the beginning, that predate all the, I guess, the trivialization of all of these stories. They're really Jungian, right? They're really at the subconscious level, including the mothers, the Eros, right? One of the oldest gods, etc. So yeah, it's a very interesting comment there, Madeline. Anyone else for a final chance to tie all this together? If not, then we will probably stop at this point. It has been a great discussion. Thank you, everybody, for contributing. And just a quick note on the next time. So I am probably not going to be able to make it to the next meetup. So I'm going to talk to Shrikant about postponing for maybe after the holiday season, because everybody's very busy with the holidays. Doug, you agree? Okay. So I will email Shrikant. That will give everybody a chance to catch up on the reading if you've fallen behind a little bit, or just to go back and reread some of these passages. I think that would be great. Okay, I'm glad a lot of you agree. So I will let everybody know pretty soon, hopefully in the next couple of days after I talk to Shrikant. So anyway, again, another great time discussion. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you shortly, or in a couple of weeks at least. All right.
Thank you so much, Phil.
You are welcome.
All right.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you,
Good
Phil.
night.
Thanks, everybody.